well, I'm having this virtual conference, and we decided, to pick a theme. And it was talking to a couple colleagues that I have great respect for, Brendan Wallace at Fifth Wall and Lindsay Baker at the time, who had been at Rocky Mountain Institute, and just, soliciting ideas for this virtual event. And they're like, well, you really do something around climate. I'm like, well, but what's the impact on my world, on my industry, real estate? Like, I never heard anybody talk about climate sustainability in real estate. A little bit on the edges. Like, well, Michael, 40% of all carbon emissions are coming from the built world. And that was that, like, holy shit moment.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of CleanTechies, the podcast. This is episode 49 of the podcast, and today we are joined by Michael Beckerman, the founder and CEO of CRETECH and CleanTech Climate. Michael, while relatively new to ClimateTech, has been quick to jump in and become, I would say, a clear leader inside of clean real estate technology space. I don't know exactly how you define that. Some people call it prop tech, which is generally a more broad term for property tech, but again, kind of become quite an expert in the clean real estate technology space. And in today's show, we go through a lot from, the general landscape of the real estate industry at present, what it could be, what it can be, the technology out there to help solve the problems regarding carbon emissions from buildings and from built environment. We talk about the talent shortage, education, the role of government, and I think what's probably important for some people listening, especially as regards to New York City local people, is the local law 97. So we talked a little bit about that. And then I guess generally speaking, was really, really enjoyable conversation with Michael. I really hope you enjoyed it as much as I did recording it. And before we do get into the show, of course, want to make special thanks to our sponsors, Next Wave Partners. So Next Wave Partners are experts in talent acquisition, recruitment, and retention across the climate tech, renewables, and ESG spaces globally. So if your team is growing and you're looking to add to the team, maybe you have specific talent needs that are kind of hard to fill through your own public postings, feel free to reach out to Next Wave. They can help you with any of those specialized search needs. If you're looking to make a change in your career, also you can consider reaching out to them. And if sometimes the consultants can offer you good advice, maybe they might have opportunities that are a good fit for you. So definitely reach out to them. You can do that at next-wavepartners.com. Otherwise, you can reach out to one of their consultants directly via their LinkedIn page. And without any further delay, let's get into the show.
All right. Welcome to the show, Michael. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thank you. Good to spend some time with you. And thanks for having me on the podcast. Big fan.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate that. I'm really, really excited to have you on. I don't know if we've really had a New York City real estate expert on yet. And we've talked about climate tech and as regards to prop tech in general a couple times, but this will be a new one for us. So if you want to just maybe give us a quick kind of background to yourself and what you're doing now, would be great to start off.
And let me put an asterisk and a preface my comments by saying I'm not an expert on anything. So I'm a perpetual student of just observing far smarter people than me and trying to just pay attention to sort of market cycles and how industries evolve. For me, I've only ever been in one industry my whole career. Now, a long career of 35 years, I can't believe it, in commercial real estate. So the first 25 years or so, it was more on the public relations and the media marketing side of the industry, representing a lot of big real estate companies, built a big agency, decided at some point, I just felt that sort of urge to explore what else was out there, the next frontier for me personally. I think I'd gotten pretty stale and burnt out in what I was doing. I wasn't really learning. And, I was always fascinated by technology. I didn't really know anything about it, but I was always sort of studying these other tech sectors, whether it was fintech or healthcare, and mostly just B2B tech. And so I was like, why not me? I mean, I know this industry. I don't really know anything about technology, but I know how the industry is wired and how it works and what moves it. So I started just sort of helping to build this, what they call now the prop tech. It's not my favorite term, but it's one people recognize. I'd say real estate technology and innovation ecosystem, mostly centered in New York. This is circa 2014, 2015, a very small sector. Maybe 50 million, 100 million being invested. by mostly high net worth real estate owners, investors in sort of emerging tech companies. And then, so through CRETECH, our events, conferences, platform, we started to see things really scale. So my events would go from 200, fast forward to 2019, pre-COVID. The last event that I did in Brooklyn, well over 2,000 people. The ecosystem has over 10,000 startups, and there's about 20-30 billion dollars coming into the space. We pushed to Europe right around that time, bought a company that's doing what we were doing, called Future Prop, seeing that this real estate tech ecosystem was moving globally. So we made that acquisition. COVID came, scary as all hell, obviously, for a lot of businesses, a lot of companies, particularly those in the physical, event businesses, many other businesses. But I got a great team, great leadership, and we persevered. And, it was about 2021, I think, around that time, we did a virtual conference. And I've always, just by background, considered myself to be an environmentalist, whatever that means. I am fortunate that I've had the privilege of living on a nice piece of land in the Northeast. And I've always been inspired by nature and the environment. And that was my personal life. Well, I'm having this virtual conference, and we decided, to pick a theme. And it was talking to a couple of colleagues that I have great respect for, Brendan Wallace at Fifth Wall and Lindsay Baker at the time, who had been Rocky Mountain Institute. And just, soliciting ideas for this virtual event. And they're like, well, you really do something around climate. I'm like, well, but what's the impact on my world, on my industry, real estate? Like, I never heard anybody talk about climate sustainability in real estate. A little bit on the edges. Like, well, Michael, 40% of all carbon emissions are coming from the built world. And that was that, like, holy shit moment. Like, where have I been? How come I didn't know this? And then I just felt like at that time, all these roads that I traveled down in my career led me to that moment, which my real estate connections and knowledge, the time I spent building this real estate tech ecosystem converged and said, now this will be your legacy, your personal life, your personal passions and priorities will match your professional life. And not abandoning the prop tech at all. That industry is thriving, but now my attention is really focused on climate tech in the built world. So we went back into physical conferences late 2021. I did my first climate conference in Copenhagen recently, and it's going to be a central part of our platform at CRETECH going forward. And this is my personal mission and professional mission to decarbonize the built world, which is a massive undertaking. But, as a society, we don't get, to net zero or zero without the real estate industry leading the way. So that's where I'm focused.
I guess I'm kind of curious about two things. First of all, I feel like that's probably relatable when you mentioned that you were in a different industry, kind of in the media side of things for buildings, but then you started kind of seeing technology and were interested by it. A lot of people, from what I've gathered, as a recruiter, have had kind of these moments where they're looking to go across to something else. How did you make that transition, and how did you actually, make that happen? And what led you to really just make the leap? Because I know a lot of people are afraid of doing that.
What a great question. I don't know if anybody asked me that question. As I reflect on it, I think sort of just my upbringing, which was, very much, you figure it out, you fend for yourself, and very sort of hands-off childhood in that sense. And I wasn't a good student, had to figure out how to get to work, get a job, pay my own way. Started working. I was a failed college student, so I started working very, very early to provide for myself, and then decided, fell into PR and media. I just kind of liked it. So I didn't know anything about it. I didn't have any background in it. I didn't go to school for it. I didn't know anybody who was in it. And I guess it's that sort of fearlessness that, not always probably the best decisions that, one would make to optimize their career, but the best decisions for me and my journey. So I think I've just never been afraid of risk. And I've always been sort of driven by self-growth, not, wealth accumulation. That I always figured, if you love what you do, you're passionate about it, you'll be fine. But if you just go and follow the path that either others lay out for you or society tells you, it can be a pretty unhappy journey. So for me, while I'm sure there were easier directions and paths for me to go down, I don't regret any of it, because it's been very fulfilling, exhausting, as an entrepreneur, but I've just never been afraid of taking the risks. And the reward, you have to be comfortable with the failure and, the loneliness of the journey, because it's only yourself that you're kind of listening to. And so when it came to, after I built the PR agency and it was thriving, and then I'm at that moment, I remember the moment, and I just said, this doesn't feel good anymore. And I knew what was next. I was going to leave. I was going to walk away from my own business that I built so hard, 7 days a week, 16, 18 hours a day, in my 20s, in my 30s, in my 40s. I got to the pinnacle. The textbook says, stick it out and go play golf. I don't know. I don't play golf or whatever.
Yeah.
And that was not in the cards for me. It was like, no, we're going to start from zero. We're going to go back. So I figured out how to, I merged or bought another agency or two, and I basically, turned it over to another team and said, we'll transact, done, but I'll go start from the beginning again. And that's what I've been doing. And I don't regret a minute of it, because for me, when I measure success, it's about fulfillment and impact.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating. I've come across some of the most interesting people that I've met that I really look up to. They've had these kind of journeys where they go in one area, and then maybe they're keeping an eye on the kind of cutting edge of things, or maybe they get to a certain point and then they come up for air, because when you're building something like that, you can't really come up for air, to be honest. And then they go somewhere else, and because of those maybe 2 or 3 jumps that they've made, they have this kind of bedrock of experiences that really sets them up for something, right? In your case, I think it's a great example where you had this kind of PR experience, then you went into real estate, and then you were able to really compare those two together and what you're doing with CRETECH. I think is really fascinating. The other part of that question, the other question I want to have after your intro is, could you maybe help understand? I've always been curious about, with 40% emissions coming from buildings, what percentage, if you know, is from new building, like is from the act of building new buildings versus the operations of buildings, existing buildings?
So the first thing is to understand is that, again, and just to your previous question, I felt like I've gotten a good handle on the tech sector over the last couple of years running CRETECH. We've built this massive global industry, following 100,000 plus globally. And I feel like I've got that good sense of knowledge of where things are going. Now I step into climate because I sense that's where it's moving next. And for me, that's where I want to go. So just constant evolution. So it's, again, just learning and educating myself and flipping the podcast around and talking to smart people like you who know this field, renewables, et cetera, far better than I do, and just asking a lot of questions. That's what I try and do, and listen. So now I come to this climate moment, and the real estate industry is the biggest industry on earth, right? Measured by global GDP. It's in the hundreds of trillions. Okay. And it's 40% of all of these carbon emissions. And a good friend, Travis Connors, a great venture firm at Building Ventures, he calls it the 40% problem. So it's 40% of greenhouse gas emissions, 40% of energy, 40% of raw materials, and 40% of all landfill materials. So it's staggering, because it's more than I always thought, well, it's got to be transportation, it's got to be oil, it's got to be gas, it's got to be this, it's got to be. No, it's the built environment. 29% of that is operating carbon, so existing facilities that we work and we live in. And and then the rest of that 11% is what we call embodied carbon, which is the making, the manufacturing, the transportation of the materials to build. So those are the facts. And I think the other fact that is just staggering is when you think about what it's going to cost to decarbonize the built world. I mean, you're talking 100, if not more, $1 trillion. I mean, just like let that sink in. So I think it's something like I was talking to Greg Smith. He's a Fifth Wall, another great venture firm, the largest climate-focused venture firm in our industry, in the built world. And he says it's about 7 trillion every year we need to spend on decarbonization of the built world. And the internet of all time is about $1 trillion. So you just think about like the magnitude of this crisis in the built world. It's just staggering. Mm-hmm. And, you know, when I think about the prop tech world, it's a terrible thing to say, but, you know, COVID was an extraordinary accelerant of tech adoption. So we had this horrific event, COVID, and that drove adoption of tech in our world because people had to work from home and they had to figure it all out, like a lot of other industries. And the thing is about climate is it's like COVID every day, like it's not stopping. So we don't have any time to waste, and yet so it's not a topic of conversation that's happening every day in the States. At least it's happening in other parts of the world. So I'm on this mission to just try and, you know, educate, raise the level of awareness, and then hopefully drive investment into the decarbonization solutions. And the good news, though, is the solutions are there. Like they're there. There's just not the will yet.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, why don't we, I mean, there's a lot of things you could unpack there. I think maybe most helpful could you talk about what are I mean, again, I'm sure every building's a little different, but what are the key solutions and the kind of key pillars to, you know, reducing this footprint of these buildings, whether it's retrofitting or building new? Could you just kind of walk us through those main areas to reduce the impact, and maybe some of the technologies in there that'd be really fascinating for people to hear about that are maybe they're not aware of?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I just want to, before we get into that, I really want to emphasize that I do have faith in technology. And that sounds so sort of, you know, I know like George Orwellian, but it is going to come down to the technology. You know, I mean, you know, you're in New York, I'm in the suburbs. You know how divided we are politically and socially, economically, and the thought that this, you know, quote unquote, United States of America is going to wake up one day and universally say, let's all, you know, embrace this and get behind this movement, right? I mean, typically that'll happen in wars and things like that. And climate, unfortunately, doesn't seem like it's a war, but it should be. So where then is this? Where is the faith? Where's the hope? And it's going to come down to technology, because you take a look at like Tesla. You know, why are they the world's, you know, biggest auto company? Is it because they're building an EV? No, because they built an unfucking believable automobile that's fast, it's cool, it's got a lot of great features, and people love it, that don't give a shit about the environment. So a lot of the solutions that are out there, you know, they're just good for business. So I don't get into the moral argument. I'm not here to preach or to, you know, to shame anybody and say, you know, you're culpable, you're responsible. The facts are what the facts are. The solutions will be that there will be a brown sort of discount. So if your buildings are brown and they're dirty and they're not energy efficient and they're not net zero and they're not hitting climate targets, you will pay a penalty. You will be forced to pay the penalty either by government, local law 97, many other laws across the country. So or you just won't be able to command the rents, or you won't be able to underwrite it. You won't be able to finance it. On the positive side, green buildings will trade higher. It's proven, study after study, some great studies out there from Harvard and MIT and Stanford and many others that show that green buildings command higher rent and they sell for more money. So how do you get there? You get there through technology. You get there through, there's just extraordinary HVAC systems. There's extraordinary advances being made in concrete, because concrete as a material is the single biggest, contributor on the embodied side. So there's amazing innovation being in concrete. There's geothermal. There's heat pumps. There's just so many mass timber, sustainable steel. A lot of the solutions, we don't need. Yes, I'd love for Elon Musk to come and build us a solution, but there's some amazing tools that are out there. There's some far out things like 3D printed homes. Prefab, I think, has great potential in the space. But I think, I don't want to like pick one solution or another. There's just a plethora of options that are out there. And there's also some great measurement tools as well that I'm really excited about. You take companies like Cove Tool or Measurable or Wired Score, like they'll tell you within your building or within your portfolio what your carbon impact is. So the measurement is there, the tools are there. To electrify buildings today, it's completely possible to get them off of gas and oil and what have you. So it's the solutions are there. It's just what we're missing is just the will and the desire. But I think it will come down to the ROI.
Yeah, that's sort of the interesting thing, because I've had some other people who kind of opened my eyes to this on here that talked about the economics, right? Because of the higher rents and the higher saleability of these properties. But it's not even just that. Like, obviously right now, if you go into it early, you have an advantage over the market, right? But eventually it'll become a point where you're at a disadvantage, like you mentioned, right? So if you don't do it now, you're going to be behind rather than just them being ahead of you. So I think that's fascinating. And I do think people are moving that way. I guess you mentioned all these solutions, right? Because again, I agree from what I've heard and seen that there's no one silver bullet, right? You can't just, click on a light switch and it's all done. It has to be many things. How are people integrating these things together? Because obviously if these companies are building really good tech in one area or the next, they're probably really focused on that. And maybe they aren't working to make sure they're able to integrate and kind of work together when they go build this. So how is this looking? Are building owners usually going to consultants to try to find all these solutions and package them together? Like, what are you usually seeing, and how are people kind of working across the lanes?
Yeah, great question. I'd invite your listeners to go find just some great examples of companies, whether it's Boston Properties or Hudson Pacific. In Europe, it's table stakes. So, if you want to see where the US is heading, just watch Europe, because it's everywhere. It's all anybody talks about in Europe is sustainability. It's table stakes. So I'd say, there's a lot of great companies that are making climate sustainability, a priority. And I just go find those developers. A lot of them, and this goes really to your sector. Listen, if I was, your age or anybody, coming out of school, I cannot think of a more impactful profession to get into than sustainability in the built environment, for all the reasons we talked about. And there is a talent shortage, right? I know, again, that's your business, but I see it. So there's so many jobs that are available for real estate companies looking to hire, people who have some degree of expertise, some experience, if not just the passion and the commitment to roll up their sleeves and get busy on the decarbonization of the built world. So, yeah, there are some great companies that are leading the way. There are some great consultants that are helping companies integrate a lot of these solutions. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to people. And there is a shortage of people right now. Again, I draw the comparison to Europe. It's just night and day. In Europe, there are just so many heads of sustainability managers. So you look at a lot of real estate companies and they've got, a dozen or so of sustainability professionals. Here in the States, we're still not there yet. And I think once we do that integration question, I think it'll get a lot easier. So the tools are there, the consultants are there. There's some great case studies, there's some great examples. What we really need, though, is we need an army of activists. And I use the word activist a lot. And when I talk about activists, I'm talking about, I'm a huge fan of Greta. I think what she's done is amazing, but I'm not talking about, you have to take to the streets. What I'm talking about, the activists, is the Larry Fink kind of activists. And say what you want. There's somebody is in a position of power that's making this a priority and making the case. So what we need is an army of people to join this movement that this is core to their whole philosophy, how they want to work, and the type of work they want to do, to join this real estate industry and sustainability movement to really give it the steam that it needs and the momentum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it meets a lot of boxes for young people, right? Because real estate, especially anybody, who wants to, typically, if they think about building wealth, they're going to think about real estate usually. And then not only that, it's super fascinating. Even if you take climate out of the picture, there's so many fascinating kind of technologies. But to me, the most fascinating thing is how, and this is the reason I got into the podcast, and in the first place, was I found out that it made absolutely no sense to not do the climate friendly way because it had better ROI in almost every situation, right? We talk about the concrete and all these kinds of companies that do these things. It just makes more sense. So I'm fascinated by that. I'm keen to maybe hear your thoughts on, generally speaking, on the talent market. You mentioned there's a shortage. What do you think about, so this is something I talk with a lot of people on here about, is a lot of people kind of think that it's necessary to go to a 4-year degree to get something and then go into the workplace. A lot of times there's still a lot of upskilling. I see this as a recruiter. Most people, unless it's an Ivy League college, they don't really care where you went to school. And I'm curious to hear if you have, given that we need kind of an army of people to fill these shoes of these workers, do you see a different model popping up in the future where it's more companies taking on the role of training people, or boot camps, kind of getting people through the basics really quickly and into the market in a much faster way that's more efficient and better for their own pocketbooks as well?
Wow. You have some good questions. Again, I think I'm the outlier here because of my own personal journey, which obviously, it colors your view of the world, right? That's my perspective. I try and understand others, of course. People know, not to get too personal, but my friends and peers know, I've been a practicing Buddhist for a number of years. And one of the things about Buddhism is, you really try and understand other people's perspectives and really be sensitive to that. So I try and think about other people and what's important to them. I could just share my view. I think a college education is great for a lot of people, but it's a waste of fucking money for a lot of people too. And I think it's a monopoly, and I think it's a conspiracy, and I think it's a consortium, and I think it's it's a white collar mafia is in my mind, because why are we paying these exorbitant fees to send kids away to learn what? To party for a couple of years? And I'm not saying that's what college is. I'm just saying you hear so much, well, you go away from home, you get experience, You learn to be on your own, you earn your own, you learn to be independent. And what are you studying? You're studying, in a lot of cases, archaic uh, textbooks and stories and narratives that are outdated and don't work anymore. The world is changing so fast. And to me, I much more value experiences. Show me a kid, that at 14 was working at a summer camp, at 16 was a busboy or a busgirl or a waitress, at 20 was interning, at 22, or something, took a gap year and went to go build homes somewhere in another country, that volunteered, that has passion for something, a heart, and a commitment to make change and do good and work well with others. I don't know that college is the only way that you get, the relative experience to go into the workplace. I think in a lot of cases it's not the answer. And I wish, I don't understand. I wish that in our culture, we didn't put such an emphasis on that's pass or fail. That, in my neighborhood, it's graduation season now, and you drive around town and you see these flags. My kid's going to Cornell, my kid's going to Duke, my kid's going to NYU or Wisconsin, great school, by the way. And I'm like, where did that come from? Who's the one that's celebrating here? Is it the parent or the kid?
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? I wish
think
there was another way, an apprentice way, much like I'm learning in Europe. That's why I'm spending so much time in Europe, because I just feel like, they're producing people with real skills and real experience, and they're matching passion with, career. And I don't know that college is the only way that you can get that. And I think too much in our culture, we say, unless you have this 4-year degree, you cannot go to this step. Well, who says that? Yeah. I don't say that. Most of my friends that are the most successful, however you define success, whether they're artists or musicians or business people, they're more like me than they are, like other people that they're the creatives, and it's not for everybody. Like, again, if you're going to be an engineer, I get it. You want to get into Stanford, or you want to get to great school. If you want to have a particular, if you want to be a CPA or an accountant or a lawyer or a doctor, I get it. But there's so many millions and millions of people that were like me, that college just gave us the middle finger and said, you know what, you're not good enough to get in here. And I didn't have another choice,
Yeah, I think this is fascinating.
You got me going.
Yeah, no, I love it. It's my favorite topic. It's my favorite topic, mainly because I also did not go to university, right? I was homeschooled. I had a very different upbringing than most people. And being a recruiter, I get to talk to a lot of people and try to understand kind of what they want in life and, what they're doing. And I oftentimes feel that aside from engineering, like you mentioned, it's very, very pointless to some extent, because these people, they maybe go to this school and then they're getting jobs in something that they care about that's different than what they went to school for. And it's kind of a waste of 4 years of their life, right? 4 years is a long, long time to be doing something, right? To be testing what you like and doing other things. And there was this recent idea, like, again, maybe this is a little bit more in favor of universities in general, but it's not being played out this way, is that university systems should be used, especially from the federal loan perspective, of being able to say, listen, we need X talent. We're going to be funding loans for these things. We're not going to be funding loans for the other things that don't matter to our next stage of growth as a country, right? Right now, you could argue across the climate space in general that we really need talent there, right? So maybe those types of loans are getting more approved at the expense of maybe less liberal arts degrees or something like that, right? So I think that there are positive things, but I also do tend to agree it's difficult to have I didn't go to university, so I don't know the experience exactly, but my understanding is it's a relatively slow moving university experience, right? To build these things takes time, and usually technology is a few years behind, when they could just go work for a startup and get the fresh stuff, off the printer.
I think I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And I could tell that's one of the reasons why I have such great respect for you. I think that what we don't do as a society here, at least in the States, is, we don't emphasize critical thinking and creativity and sort of self-growth and entrepreneurship enough. But we celebrate money, we celebrate success, we celebrate again, degrees and these formulas. But I just think that what we put so much emphasis on this university structure and system that we abandon, and we leave a lot of great talent behind that could be so purposeful and useful in the workplace. And the best people I've worked with, the best hires I've ever made, I don't know where they went to school. I don't know what their GPA is, but I can look them in the eye and say, this kid, she or he, they've got that it. Where'd they get that it? Well, their parents ran a small business, or they were homeschooled, or they have a side hustle as a painter, or they're an avid reader, or they're a writer, or they're just. I think the arts and the humanities, we've just lost a lot of that critical thinking, and that's where the great, I think, innovation comes from. I think we have a tendency to just. I look at like the way my kids have come up, and they're wonderful, kind, thoughtful, good, decent humans. And yet, they've been in this school system that it's like, I don't think it's changed since the 1920s. Put them in a desk, put a book in front of them, make them memorize the book, and you got to memorize the book, take a test, get a grade on. I mean, like, what are we doing? Like,
yeah, we need techno king Elon Musk to solve that one too. I know if you he has his kids in his own kind of school that's more of just like them solving problems. I think it's fascinating. I don't know much about it, but I'd be keen to learn more. Man, there's so many things we could go. I think I'd be keen. Obviously, I'm a big fan of New York City, of course. So maybe could you talk a little bit about the ClimateTech space, or I guess ClimateTech inside of real estate in New York City specifically? Like, what's happening here? What are some of the things that you're excited for the future? Just would be keen to kind of hear maybe even the history and evolution, if you have some context there, of how New York City has become this place and how they're kind of fostering the innovation in the real estate space, given that we are pretty much the greatest city in the world.
Spoken like a New Yorker. That's great. Well, I think New York is like a great example of sort of what's coming to the industry. So you have, in my humble opinion, the greatest city in the world. It's a city that's, yes, it's had its impact from COVID and return to work, but it's nothing will ever kill New York. I mean, it's just impossible. The city's got the greatest resiliency of any city. Other cities that have been through war, of course, I don't mean to diminish them, like London, et cetera, et cetera. But, New York is just, it's got a vibrancy and an energy. It's the real estate industry. These are titans that have built the real estate sector in New York. And just, you walk around, you see these great buildings, these great structures, these great environments. It's where places from Chelsea Market to the Hudson Yards to, the High Line to, everything around Central Park. I mean, it's just a great city for the built environment, but it's got problems too. It's got challenges, affordability, congestion. I mean, as a bridge and tunnel guy, most of your audience probably doesn't know what that means as a commuter. It's a nightmare, like we were talking recently. And it's got a climate problem. So what's coming, right? So they pass a law in New York called Local Law 97, which is, look it up. It's mandating that real estate, that buildings have to hit net zero targets by certain dates and hit or be subject to incredible fines. So there it is, right? On existing buildings and on all new buildings. The majority of buildings in New York are existing. They're older, I know 10, 20, 30, 40 years old is the building stock. So now you've got it. If you want to see what's happening, you've got a political environment that's saying you've got to decarbonize or else you'll hit the penalties. You've got tenants who are saying, oh, no, we're not going to that brown building. We're only going to put our employees in a green, healthy, sustainable building because that's what our employees want. And, I don't have to tell you, labor controls everything today. So when labor says, no, we want to be in a clean building, that head of real estate for that major bank or law firm or tech company, they're going to a clean building. You've got consumers that want to live in clean buildings. You've got lenders, the BlackRocks of the world, that are saying, no, we're not lending, we're not investing unless you show us your your carbon emissions calculations. So you've got this and then we're being impacted by weather, right? You're living in the city, so the weather's fucked up. And we're just at the tipping point of what's coming. So it's the perfect I hate the term, the pun, but it's the perfect storm of what's coming and converging on New York City. I believe that New York City, say one of my dogs, that New York City will lead the country in climate leadership. That's why I'm thrilled to be part of a group that's going to build a climate museum in New York. Of all places, that museum needs to be in New York. So I think there's a lot of great examples of great buildings that are being renovated, are being retrofitted, are being built. You take One Vanderbilt by SL Green, a great, clean, green building commanding the highest rents in the history of New York City. So it's there. So if you really want to understand where this climate tech is going to impact the real estate industry, just look at New York. Look at New York.
So as far as that's always what I've generally observed. Again, I'm not super well traveled across the US, but from the cities I've been to, New York seems to have kind of some of the leading stuff on this aspect, especially when it comes to just building an ecosystem of a city, right? With transportation, right? I know once I moved here, every time I thought about going to visit a city when I didn't have to go into the office, I was like, oh, where can I go without a car? Because I don't have a car, right? And there's very few answers in the US. But I'm curious, broadly speaking, across the world, are there other cities that you would say people can look to kind of for inspiration for what they're doing in terms of green buildings and other examples? You mentioned Europe a lot. I'm assuming there's some examples there, maybe out in Asia as well. I'd be really keen to hear from your experience there.
Yeah, so we decided to have a dedicated climate event as part of CRETECH and CRETECH Climate, which is the new initiative that we've been focused on. And of all places, we kind of scoured the world, where should we go? This could be a small event for us, 120 people. We're really going to convene a summit-like experience where we're going to come together. We're going to hear some great sort of TED Talk type of presentations, and we're going to spend time just talking to each other about best practices, who's doing what, and how do we create this spark then that ignites the rest of the world to embrace sustainability in the built world. So we picked Copenhagen. I mean, after just a lot of research, it's the world's most sustainable city. And if you want to see it in action, I mean, again, it was my first year. It's there. I mean, can New York replicate Copenhagen? No, not at this stage. I don't even know if it should. But I mean, there are no cars on the streets. Everybody's riding bikes, despite the weather condition. Every development project looks like it was built with Mother Nature, not on top of her. And you see it, and you see it in the people's faces. You see it in the kids. And when I was there for a couple of days myself. I just walked around the city, and you just look at these kids, and they just look happy. You walk into a shop and talk to her, the shopkeeper, and just talk to them. What do you love about the city? It's just, we put sustainability first. And then, and that when you put sustainability first, you're putting the planet and people first, and you feel it. And then, yes, of course, there's great businesses and it's great, commerce is transacting, and there's great development projects, but there's this incredible energy plant that the architects at Big built, and they disguised it or camouflaged it in a ski slope. I mean, it's the coolest thing, Copenhagen. It's the coolest thing you've ever seen, and it's powering the entire city of Copenhagen, And you look at this thing, you're going, this is an architectural masterpiece. Go
Mhm.
look at all their different projects that they've built. It's truly stunning. Sweden, Finland, London, it's all over Europe, man. I mean, just again, go to London, man. You'll see it. I mean, London has got this. Every
Mhm.
major developer, this is what they're talking about. Now, again, in Europe, it's a little bit more organized politically, in the sense that they can enact legislation that is going to, encompass an entire city, an entire country, an entire continent, which is harder here in the States. But city by city, man, it's happening. And again, there's case studies of real success, and you can make great money and great returns, and also do good for the planet at the same time.
Mhm.
And I think that's the message, man. Like, it's trite, but like, going green is good for business and good for the environment.
I mean, it is. It's not a joke. It's not something
Yeah,
that marketing team came up with. It really is.
yeah. I mean, and like, I'm haunted by that line that I keep hearing about. Like, Gordon Gekko said in Wall Street about, where he says to Gordon Gekko, Martin Sheen's character, or Charlie Sheen, I forget which one. I get confused. And he's like, how much is enough? Like, how much are we just going to keep building the same way over and over again, knowing the impact? And if I told you, well, let me just tell, instead of using that material, use that carbon, use carbon cure, right? That their concrete product. Use that glass product. Use that air quality product. Put living walls in your space or outside your building. Instead of building new, renovate. Like, and if I told you do all those things, the tools are available. They're all there. They're easy to find. If I told you all of that, and you'll make more money in the process, and you'll do good for the environment and future generations, why not? Like,
Yeah.
why not?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
let's do this, people.
Yeah, I feel like there's everything is there to make it happen. I do think that the biggest challenge from my perspective is going to be the working together and being able to find partnerships of people doing the right stuff, because obviously, I've had several individual technology people for building stuff on here, like I'm thinking of Circuit Meter and Shark Technologies, right? Those ones are big ones that come to mind, Noya, and it would be great if they can all work together and kind of pair these solutions, because one solution can make a big impact, but when you pair them together, it can be really, really big.
Well, that's why I tried to interrupt. That's why I think, to answer that question about collaboration, the thing about the real estate industry is it's hyper competitive, right? So, you're always going to have a healthy degree of competition
Mhm.
to build the greenest, or to build it, but just good. So that's what I'm saying. Where I think it's really going to happen is in the talent pool. I think when we can attract the talent to the industry, and talent goes and starts to infiltrate a lot of these companies, then I think they'll be the ones that are discovering the solutions and what have you. I mean,
Mhm.
so I keep going back to the race for talent, and we've got to figure out a way, with your help, thank you, of attracting all those talented climate, experts to my industry. So that's what I need your help for.
I think it's fascinating because I've done several, ESG related sustainability kind of roles in real estate spaces. And as I look through, and rip through the different, real estate asset managers, any large international ones have a head of ESG for Europe, but they have like a director, or maybe they don't even have somebody in the US to oversee their sustainability aspects, because it's not required, right? And this is like, it comes down to this question. You talk about regulation. I think it's too deep for us to dive in now. We've got not enough time, but generally speaking, I'm always curious about how can governments, or should governments be involved, right? Because right now we see the market forces make sense from a capitalistic standpoint to do this, right? So it's almost as though government shouldn't be required, but maybe putting the pressure on, like New York City is doing with the local, what'd you call it? Local
Law
law
97
97.
and
That's
Boston.
how, yeah, they're helping put the pressure additionally on it, right? And maybe a carbon tax. I doubt that'll ever happen in the US, unfortunately. All these things could really put the pressure on. But again, I believe also in sunset policies with regulation. But
Yeah,
I think,
I'm
I
with
think,
you on that. I'm with you
yeah,
100% on that. I'm we're in total agreement with that. The thing is that it's like, if we're waiting for government and if
yeah,
every 4 years everything can be reversed, we're never going to get there. The clock is ticking. So that's why I
yeah,
say in the very beginning of our conversation that I do put my faith in technology, because I don't know where else to go. If I just rely on human nature, I do believe that there's a lot of people that like me and you that are very passionate about this, that are terrified about what's happening in real time, these changes in the environment, how bad it's getting. I just was reading about the Great Salt Lake, in Utah, and how that's drying up and that it's going to be toxic for people to even live around it. I mean, like, the shit is happening in real time right in front of our eyes. So how are we going to get there? Are we going to rely on government? Yeah, I think government has a role. New York's doing a good thing. Boston, Washington State, Washington, D.C., apparently. There's a lot of good cities out there. But then you're going to have a tale of two worlds. I mean, no disrespect to Miami, but Miami wants to be the crypto capital of the world. Orlando is a phenomenally progressive city as it relates to climate and sustainability. So I just think that, unfortunately, we cannot rely on the public sector. It's going to be all private.
Yeah. I think also for people listening, I've always been fascinated by this because I spent a lot of time in a 30,000, people town before I moved to New York. And there's actually a lot that you can do. We have an interesting mayor that came into Wausau, and she's done a lot of things, right? It's a small place, but with her little bit of kind of authority, she's been able to really make some impacts on a large scale in a small community, right? Which I think that sometimes goes underrated, especially in rural areas, where, from people from Wisconsin, I don't think they take the climate issue so seriously because they're used to extreme weather and it to being kind of unpredictable. So I think sometimes it goes, over their heads, but I think generally people should also consider those things that they can make on a local, make an impact on the local small areas. But Matt, this has been, obviously there's always more we could talk about. I think we've talked about quite a lot here. We can put a pin in it, but maybe any final thoughts or just things you want to offer maybe to young professionals, just any general advice. What are your final things?
I mean, that's why I was so happy to join you on your podcast, because we need an army of activists and passionate people who who are as terrified as I am, as you are, but that also see that this is the greatest single wealth creation opportunity in history. Let that sink in. So great, do good, help make a massive impact on climate, and at the same time earn a great living and a great career. We need help. I need your help. So let's go. Let's do this. So I think it's just really, I just push it, back to you, which is, I need you to bring as much talent to this industry as you possibly can, man.
I'm open for introductions.
Inspire me, man. Like, I've been teaching a lot of classes lately and giving some keynotes at different universities. And again, I shit on the university structure, really only because I think it excludes a lot of people like me that did not check all the right boxes. But man, I have such great respect for all the great universities out there. And if you're a young person that's getting a great education and feels like it's been a worthwhile journey, then that's terrific. Great. I don't shit on that. So if you're a young person and you want a great career and have a real impact, come into ClimateTech in the built world. That's my message.
Very good. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you coming on, Michael. It's been a pleasure. Yeah.
Really enjoyed it. Keep up the great work. Appreciate all that you're doing, man.
All right. Thanks everybody so much for joining on today's episode with Michael. Really hope you enjoyed the conversation. I would be keen to hear your thoughts. Feel free to reach out to us on Slack or LinkedIn. Any way that you want to reach out, pretty much we're available. But if you are listening on any platform with a rating, we please do rate and review the podcast, as it really helps us to expand our reach. And of course, subscribe and turn on notifications to be made aware of other episodes coming in the future. Also want to make mention, if you are looking to be a sponsor on the show, feel free to reach out to me. My email is in the description, as well as any ClimateTech founders or just people in the space looking for possibly introductions to any of the guests I've had on, or other ClimateTech services such as marketing or legal services. Feel free to reach out. I'm always glad to help wherever I can. If you are interested to get more involved, feel free to join the Slack channel. The link is also in the description. You can network with some other professionals. Just a nice place, another way to connect with other people. And then, of course, follow our LinkedIn page for more interaction with the community, with other people in the ClimateTech space. And please do, of course, reach out to Michael on LinkedIn. Really great resource to have, especially in the clean building space. And again, if you have any questions for me, always glad to take them. On a quick note, for our next episode, we will be speaking with James Regulinski, the co-founder of Carbon Collective, who has built a platform for folks to invest in basically short or long-term savings, so whether it's retirement or saving for a house or something like that, in a fully climate-aligned way, so that they're helping to solve the problem of climate change rather than promote kind of these big companies that maybe aren't in line with the climate agenda. So really interesting conversation with James coming up next. And thank you again so much for listening to CleanTechies, the podcast. We will see you next time.